Hi, you're listening to Stephan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics brought to you by swan.com. As you've seen with the debt ceiling shenanigans, it looks like they are just going to be printing a lot more over the years. If you need to future-proof your business or your balance sheet, check out swan.com/business. Swan Business can help you add Bitcoin to your corporate balance sheet, and it's never been easier. The process is really fast. You can onboard your business, nonprofit, or trust in 1 to 2 days and add Bitcoin to your balance sheet. You can get guidance along the way in terms of Bitcoin investment, custody, and management strategy. Also, if you have staff and you want to pay out a fringe benefit to them, let's say $50 a month or $100 a month to your staff in Bitcoin, there is the Bitcoin Benefit Plan, which makes it easy for you. You can use that as part of your recruiting and retention strategy to retain your top talent. So if you're interested in that, go to swan.com/business to sign up. My favorite Bitcoin hardware in the space comes from coinkite.com. They have a range of products, most notably the Cold Card Mark IV, which is a very reliable device that you can use to make sure that you are holding your own keys. So don't leave your keys with a custodian. Use the Cold Card, and you can use it easily with desktop software such as Sparrow Wallet or Spectre Desktop or Electrum, or you can even use it with NFC with phone apps such as Nunchuck. The cool thing with hardware like the Cold Card is that you don't have to phone home. It doesn't have to phone home to a company server. You can set it up completely on your own. You can air gap it by just plugging it into the wall and spinning up and initializing your wallet that way. And the Cold Card has a range of features. You can use it with Seed XOR, there's a Duress pin, a BrickMe pin, and you can use a passphrase, you can use multi-signature, there's all kinds of options. So go to coinkite.com, use code Livera for a discount on your Cold Cards. Mempool.space is where I go to check the fee before I send Bitcoin on-chain transactions. It is a comprehensive Bitcoin explorer covering the Bitcoin ecosystem, whether that's the mempool, the blockchain, and second layer networks. And recently, there was the announcement about the Transaction Accelerator, which is a new service that Mempool are going to be rolling out. So keep your eyes peeled for more information on this. And in the meantime, use mempool.space. You can even host it yourself, so you don't have to trust somebody else. If you're with an enterprise, mempool.space has custom mempool instances, and you can have your company's branding as well as extra support and feature requests with the team. So go to mempool.space/enterprise. For today's episode, we're talking about Lightning in a high-fee environment. What things change? How did the network and how did people perform in this recent round of a fee spike? And joining me are Niftynei, or also known as Lisa from Base58, who was recently working at Blockstream, D++, who is a Bitcoin and Lightning educator, and Nate, who's also at Voltage, head of support and education. So they join me to talk about this Lightning in a high-fee environment situation. Hey guys, welcome to the show. I just thought it would be an interesting one, obviously with what's happening with the Lightning fees, and obviously being in a higher fee environment in the block space market. Let's say. And so I know you guys all have a lot of experience working with Lightning. You're often teaching other people how to use Lightning. Yeah, I guess we'll just kind of maybe we'll just quickly go through just to make sure everyone sort of knows who you are. Just take a quick 30 seconds and kind of introduce yourselves in terms of what's your main focus nowadays. Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Hey everyone, my name's Lisa, also go by Niftynei on the internet. I spent 5 years working at Blockstream on the Lightning spec, particularly around channel opens. Currently taking a small break from being a protocol developer to build a Bitcoin technical education initiative called Base58. And check us out on the web at base58.school.
Fantastic. And Nate from Voltage.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Nate. I'm a Lightning Network hobbyist turned Bitcoin, career guy that does support and education at Voltage. And that's pretty much me.
Great. And D++.
Hi, D++. I think people know me from PlebNet. I'm also a Bitcoin educator, and I also teach people how to code.
Fantastic. Well, I think let me just sort of set a few of the rough high-level details, and then we can get into a bit of the actual discussion about Lightning in a high-fee environment. So I think this is mostly driven by the recent round of ordinals and inscriptions, right? And so, for listeners in the future, we're recording this the 29th of May to 2023. And, at this time, well, just recently, not right now, but let's say a few weeks ago, there was a big craze in the mempool or in mempools, let's say. And if you were trying to get into the next block at the high priority, let's say on mempool.space, you might have been paying something like $50 in the fiat terms. And in sat terms, you might have been paying something like 500 sats per VByte, something in that range. Now, as we speak today, high priority is about $1.78 in fiat terms and 46 sats per VByte in Bitcoin terms. Let's start with just a bit of a discussion about how you think Lightning nodes handled this recent round of high fees. Did they do it well, or were people getting it wrong? What do you guys think? Maybe we'll start with you, Nate.
Sure. Yeah. So, what I saw was, a lot of channels. So we're gonna get into the. I'm just gonna dive right into it. So it's like there's a forced closure problem. So forced closures, for those that don't know, is when a channel closes unilaterally, meaning only one of the two peers decides to broadcast the commit transaction, and this can happen sort of automatically as a security mechanism for many reasons. And when the commit transaction doesn't have enough sats in reserve to broadcast the fee for the closure, then this channel closure could be pending for a long time, especially if fee rates go up before, just spontaneously. Like it felt fairly spontaneous. And there are a few things that have come out that are helping to mitigate this. We could talk about anchor reserves and stuff like that. But a lot of folks were kind of caught like, oh no, a forced close just happened for whatever reason, and now my transaction's at 6 sats per VByte and 150 sats per VByte is like next block. So there's been some issues there, but I'll just leave it to either Lisa or Dee to jump in after that.
D++, let's hear from you.
Yeah. Well, for one, I would say it's an unfortunate time for forced closures to be happening in such a high fee environment, for one. But it's also important to kind of note the context, and that is a world in which folks are inscribing arbitrary data on the Bitcoin blockchain. And I think it's just really important to note that this is not an attack on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not under attack. Bitcoin is working just fine. There are some folks who are competing for that block space, and Bitcoin has a free market fee environment such that you can bid for the block space that you want. And we're seeing people put monkey JPEGs on the blockchain. Now that said, I do think that people minting, if you will, thousands of profile photos and attempting to sell those to folks for real money, I do think that is a grift, to be fair. But it's not an attack on Bitcoin. Bitcoin's working just fine. I do think that those folks are going to get priced out by the economic activity. But all we've heard for the last year or so before inscriptions was the fee market, the fee market, the fee market. How is Bitcoin going to develop a healthy fee market? And does it need to hard fork? And does it need tail emissions? Does it need demurrage? And then we saw a healthy fee market become established out of a free market competition for block space. And those same people are saying that Bitcoin is under attack, which of course it is not. Now, that said, I do think that this is a good little test net for us to start thinking about, well, what are we going to do when we see Bitcoin develop a really, really strong fee market to the point to where it's not just $50 to get into the next block, it's $500 or $5,000 type thing. And so that said, I'm really happy that we're having this discussion today. It just couldn't be more timely. And I'm excited actually to learn from y'all, because there's so many things about Bitcoin and Lightning that I do not understand. I feel like in prepping for today, I just have more questions than I have answers. if I'm honest. So, Nifty, Nate, and Stephan, I hope you don't mind if I pick y'all's brains today. I'm just considering myself to be a student of all of the new things that are happening on Bitcoin, which, by the way, is a lot.
Well, I think you're right. There's a lot of things we're all learning, and I'm curious to hear what Lisa has to say about this recent fee market or block space market, let's say.
Yeah, so I think this is really kind of highlighting one of the, not challenges, but sort of like the interface between Lightning and which is a layer 2 and layer 1, right? Kind of happens in that block space market, so to speak. So Lightning's ability to function sort of relies on its relationship to being able to get transactions into blocks on the layer 1. And there's definitely, I think, some challenges with the way that the current protocol is written, both in the Bitcoin layer 1 as well as in Lightning, the layer 2 protocol. These are two separate projects, both have different protocols, but there's some interactions between the two of them that we kind of see play out. And high fee environments, I think, really exacerbate or highlight some of the problems or issues or edge cases that there's current and ongoing projects to try and fix, right? So Nate was talking about, and Nate, maybe I misheard you, but you mentioned someone had a forced close go through, or a close, a force. So forced closes are ideally never happen. One. So I think we should maybe say that the fact that a forced close is happening is usually a sign that something is kind of a wrong in the protocol, so to speak, or something is happening on the node that maybe shouldn't, and so maybe there's something we as protocol developers on the Lightning side need to fix, or as Lightning implementers, maybe there's something with our implementation that we need to take a look at and fix, so that whatever's causing these forced closes, we can mitigate for the next time. One of the kind of frustrations that I've had with the forced closures stuff is that it's been really difficult, I think, to get good information about what the root cause of these closures are. So Core Lightning has this really amazing thing where it'll keep track of when your channel changes state. So when there's different phases that a new channel on Lightning goes through, the process of opening it, when it's open, when it's operational, when it's closing, and we annotate why each state change happens. So if there's a forced close, your Core Lightning node in its log should tell you who closed it. Was it you or your peer? Why it closed? Was it a protocol problem? Was there an error? And it should be logging what the error is. Problem is, I think we don't keep those logs around longer than 100 blocks or however many blocks after the channel closes. So unless someone is scraping them or holding them or recording them somewhere and saving it, you do you get the information, but it doesn't stick around forever, I guess is what I'm saying. So I think there's definitely I think a better job we could do in terms of keeping and tracking this information so that we as protocol and implementation developers can figure out what the root cause of it is, right? Because unless we know why all these forced closes are happening, it's very hard to know what needs to fix or what needs to change. Okay, so that's kind of a high level thing. One of the things I think that this particularly high fee environment starts to highlight though is the relationship between Lightning payments and on-chain, the on-chain payment stuff, or Nate was talking about how, I think Nate, you mentioned someone had a force close and they the force close transactions get built at a point in time. And when the force close transactions get built, and this has to do with the way that Lightning works, when those force close transactions get built, they have a built-in fee rate on them currently, right? And so you were saying there was one that went out that was at 6 sats per VByte, right? Which meant the current one was 100 something, right? So 6 sat per VByte transaction isn't getting in a block anytime soon, right? And sometimes these close transactions, if you have HTLCs on them, you only have so many blocks before it's possible for for someone else to take the money, basically. So when you have a forced close transaction go through, especially one that has in-flight payments sort of on it, the timeliness with which you're able to get that transaction into a block becomes a really important problem or question, right? Okay, so there's a few things here. It's one, why was it 6 sats per VByte? Why wasn't it 100 whatever sats per VByte? That's something about how the protocol works. The other thing is like, okay, so this kind of has to do with like when you have lightning. I'm talking a lot. I can stop talking at any point. But,
no, go on.
Yeah. But when you have like a transaction that's got, so the way that lightning works is that you have these pre-signed transactions that you hold on to, right? And this 6 sat per vbyte was a pre-signed transaction. Ideally, currently, the way that the Lightning protocol works is that every time the fees change in the network, you and your channel peer are keeping track of that, and you contact each other. You like call them up on the phone. And you're like, yo, the fee rates are different. We need to update our transaction that we have signed so that it reflects the higher fee rate, right? Because if we don't do that and we have to like accidentally go to chain, we're going to end up not getting in a block. And that's like a problem, right? It's like there's a timeliness thing here. So your nodes will do this automatically. They automatically call each other up that they have a channel with and like, yo, we need to like renegotiate, put the fees up, like let's go. And then they'll like, both sides will issue new signatures for a new transaction at a higher fee rate, right? So there's a couple of things that can go wrong here. One is that when they get the phone call from the other peer, you might disagree with what they say the new fee rate is, right? So if I call you up and I'm like, yo, I think it's like 100 sats per vbyte, and on their end, they're like, no, man, it's like 50. Because sometimes we get like nodes have different views of the mempool. They're different implementations. They're running different algorithms that tell them what they think the current fee rate market is, right? So if there's any disagreement, that will lead to a forced close. So if they don't agree on what the current fee rate market is, then one of them will just send out the latest thing that they had. I don't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I've looked at this particular part of the code base in Core Lightning or the spec. But generally speaking, you'll get forced closures when there's disagreement about what the fee rate mempool is. And when the mempool is changing a lot, the odds of that happening with the current Lightning protocol, I can check in a little bit about some of the changes that are coming through the pipeline and already on the way to kind of help with this. So the challenges with that, but for current Lightning, if your peer calls you up and is like, yo, I think it's this, and you disagree, that'll cause a forced close. And if you haven't updated it since the 6 sat per vbyte thing, all of a sudden you've got a 6 sat per vbyte transaction, which is the one you've got that you're sending out to chain. And that's like how you end up with, that's one way you can end up with those sorts of transactions out on the mempool. Another thing that might happen here is maybe you haven't talked to your channel peer in a long time. Maybe you guys haven't had a payment go through your channel, and like maybe they are running Tor and your connection, your ability to talk to them isn't good. When the fee rates start going up, all of a sudden all these nodes, everyone's placing phone calls, right? So it went from being like when the fee rate is like kind of lowish, you don't have to talk to anyone because like you're all kind of in your fee rate range for all your transactions that you consider good. As soon as the fees start going up, because there's a lot more transactions in the mempool, all of a sudden, every channel, every single person you've got a channel with, every single channel, they're having to call each other, right? All of a sudden, there's all these phone calls happening across the Lightning network. Everyone's calling everyone, being like, yo, we got to hike the rates on this channel we've got, right? That happens for every single Lightning channel, every node-to-node peer connection, right? If all of your peers are connected to you over Tor, Tor's known to be kind of bad at like doing connections, right? Connections drop all the time. So if you call your peer up and try and renegotiate a new fee rate, right? It's the same as like all of a sudden, like the network getting flooded and every single channel getting a new payment that has to go through it. If at any reason your node is offline or like can't respond or the connection fails and they don't get back to you, that'll cause a forced close because you called them up and tried to get them to respond, but they're not responding. So the thing that your node does when your peer stops responding is you force close the channel, right? Because you need to update the fee rates. They're not calling you back. So there's a couple things that happen here, right? Like they can either disagree with you or they can fail to respond. And if either of those happen, the channel gets
then you might get a forced close. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious as well. Yeah. I'm curious as well on that. So let's say in this example, the forced close goes out at 6 sats per byte. Is there some kind of weird game theory about who should RBF, right? Because maybe it's like, no, you RBF. No, I, and okay. Maybe the one who really wants, yeah.
You can't RBF it because RBF requires, so the way that Lightning works is that in order to bump that transaction, for an RBF, for example, you must get a signature from both peers. The reason you force close in the first place is because you can't talk to your peer. You were trying to do effectively an off-chain RBF. this calling them up is effectively
is to
you guys
re-sign for a higher fee rate. Yeah.
An off-chain RBF, right? Like, yeah, that's probably a good way of talking about it. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, fee rates go up. You have to negotiate off-chain RBFs. Basically, that's exactly this whole like phone call conversation. Is like,
Gotcha.
yo, let's make an off-chain RBF. Let's go. Like, yeah, but you can't get in touch with them. You have to go with what you've got because you just like it's what else are you gonna do? So one of the things, so this gets into protocol changes. One of the things that we're in the process, and it's been happening, we've been on this path for a few years now, is changing how you set the fees on these in reserve, what we call commitment transactions, like the transaction that you're holding on to that you do the off-chain RBF for, the thing that you send on a forced close. So the general idea is like everyone knows that this is a problem. The problem being like having to call them up or like having one that's out of date that you negotiated with a peer 2 weeks ago. They've gone offline. You haven't been in touch with them. Fee rate goes up. You've got transactions on it. Like you've got in-flight payments on that transaction. You get in trouble and you can't talk to them. You need a way to be able to dynamically change the fees on this like in reserve transaction without having to talk to your peer, right? So then we start getting into like protocol stuff. This is like, how do we change the protocol so you don't have to do this? Also, the whole idea with like changing the protocols, what if we don't have to call each other on the phone every time the stuff changes? Like what if all those phone call conversations didn't have to happen anymore? What if instead of having to negotiate and like virtually RBF a Lightning transaction, like the in reserve transactions, what if we just like had one thing and we didn't have to change the fee rates because we could pick the fee rate at the time we needed to get that transaction mined,
Gotcha.
Right?
Is this getting into the anchor outputs stuff?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
That's where this ends up.
I've got a question for Lisa. You mentioned the forced closes happening, and it sounds like a lot of them were due to this fee negotiation thing not happening. I wonder to what extent how many of those nodes were, say, running Neutrino, meaning they didn't have a mempool to look at to predict what the fee would be, and they're using some kind of API instead, which may be brittle. And to what extent we could, I hate to say this, but to what extent we could put some of those fee estimations on, say, Nostr to help maybe further the neutrino nodes who don't have a mempool.
Well, the mempool is so this is a good question. If you think about it, mempool information is gossip information about transactions, right? So sending everyone new transactions is something that like they're not doing because they don't want to have the burden of getting all that new information every time a new transaction goes out, right? So it's really trying to reduce the bandwidth. The problem is like Nostr, my understanding is the bandwidth requirements are also quite high. So how are you packaging up that information to distribute it on Nostr? Is that actually going to allow you to cut down the amount of data that you're sending to these nodes? Or is it going to be like a similar amount of data? If you're having an indexer or a condenser who's like, the transport of how you get the data, changing it over to Nostr doesn't change the amount of data or the provenance of the data or verification of who's sending you the data. Do you trust someone if you're getting like roll-ups of what the mempool currently fee rate is? Do you trust the person who's telling you that? Like, changing over to Nostr is really just changing over the way that the information arrives. It doesn't help you with the problems that are like kind of inherent in why they're not getting that data in the first place, which is like, where is it coming from? What's actually contained in the data? How do we make like how do you make up a summary of it so that you can send less data, but then who's making the summary? Do you trust them? No, I don't think moving the data to a new relay will solve the problem with what data and who's sending it and like what kind of data you're sending.
I see. So then I guess running with that anchor outputs idea as you were getting into, Lisa, I guess then that would allow each channel partner, does that allow each channel partner to unilaterally bump fees? Yeah,
so that's the idea. So the idea with the anchor output, so there's kind of two parts here. One, we're like working on, so eventually, and we haven't done it yet. Wait, hang on, let me back up. Let's talk about anchor outputs. What is an anchor output? Anchor output is the idea that you can child pays for parent one of these these commitment transactions. And only the party who sends it, or only one of the parties that send it, has the ability to child pay for parent it. And there's a couple of reasons for this, but basically this means that now when we build these little in reserve transactions, you have a special output on it. We add 2 special outputs that only each of the channel peers can put another transaction that spends it. So this guarantees that guarantees is, there was a bunch of other stuff that had happened to make this, but I'm trying as much as possible to guarantee that you're able to add another transaction with a higher fee rate that can anchor that down into the chain, right? Which is why they're called anchor outputs. So we're providing little hooks on this transaction so that later you can figure out what the new fee rate should be, make a new transaction that adds those additional fees onto this transaction and pulls it down into the chain or pushes it to the top of the mempool, however you want to think about it. So yes, that's the idea behind anchor outputs. The long-term plan is that eventually, in a perfect world, this is where we start getting into we need protocol changes on the base layer to do this. Package relay becomes a new thing. But when we're able to do this, we can remove that phone call thing with the update fees. So we no longer have to talk about what the current fees are. So you almost entirely remove this entire class of errors, so to speak, entire class of force close vectors, because we're no longer, when the fee rates go up, remember that everyone has to get on the phone and call their buddy and be like, yo, we got to change the fees. When you have anchor outputs for everyone, you no longer need to talk about what the fees currently are. So there's no longer an opportunity for your peer to not be available and cause a forced close. And there's no longer an opportunity for you to disagree because you're not even having that conversation anymore. You're completely removing that conversation from the picture. So the forced closes for that thing, you basically cut out an entire class of errors, so to speak, from a whatever. There's no longer an opportunity for you to have a reason to force close because you won't even be doing those actions anymore. And the reason you don't have to do those actions anymore is you can basically have a minimal fee on this transaction and then have the anchors with the idea that the fee is small enough to be able to get that transaction into the mempool. And then that gives you the opportunity to add another transaction that can pull it to wherever it needs to be in the mempool, is the idea. Starts getting kind of complicated though, and this is when you start needing something like package relays. What is the minimum amount of fees you need to get that transaction into a mempool? Because when the mempool gets full, that number changes. So now we've got this kind of difficult, hard to answer question with anchor outputs without package relay, about how do we price, what's the minimal fee rate, what's a reasonable minimal fee rate that we no longer have to call each other on the phone anymore. Anyway.
And this is no, I was just gonna say this is why the max anchor UTXO on LND is 100,000 sats, which is a ton, right? It's for practical node runners, you should always have 100,000 sats UTXO on your on-chain part of your Lightning node.
Okay, but so now you're getting into an interesting side effect of using anchors, which is you need to have funds on-chain available at any point in time in order to provide those fees. So right now, the current design of Lightning, every channel inside of it has a little bucket of sats that's reserved to pay fees. And that goes up and down depending on what the current on-chain fee environment is. And those are siloed into every sats that you've locked into the channel, right? And so as those fees go up, the amount of liquidity you have in that channel in order to route payments goes down, right? So this might also, I haven't really thought through the thing here. This might contribute to on-chain to force closes, maybe. Or at least reduces.
Co-op closes too, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so on-chain fees rising have an impact on the Lightning Network capacity prior to anchors because every channel has to have, every single channel is a bucket of funds of a fixed size, right? And every time when the fee rates go up, when you make that phone call, part of the result of those phone calls that go out is that everyone makes the amount of money available to be routed goes down, right? You call
so
up
I guess you're saying it's less capital efficient, right? Because every channel has to have this reserve amount.
Every channel has, But that means that when you go to chain, you have those funds already available to make sure that that transaction can get into the next block or what block it needs to. When you go to anchor outputs and remove that little bucket in each channel, all of a sudden you still need those fees, but you have them, you can kind of save them. Now all of a sudden your node has to guard in reserve enough Bitcoin to ideally deal with any forced closes that happen at any particular time. And if you have too many channels and too many of them try to close at the same time, it's possible that you may not have enough sats on chain to save all your stuff. So the current protocol kind of sort of saves your butt a little bit by having each of these channels take care of itself and self-regulate with how much it's saving for that particular, and one way to think about this, so one way that I like thinking about capital on Lightning is through the perspective or through the lens of kind of risk management. When you make an investment, you sort of have to figure out what your risk profile is. What's the risks that you're going to need to spend that money, so to speak. There's a built-in risk calculation sort of done of how much of that channel is actually reserved for fees versus now you have to figure out how much you globally are saving for every channel. So every additional channel you open, it used to be that each one would kind of manage its own fee budget accordingly. Now your node has to make a decision about how to manage a separate reserve tank, right?
Gotcha.
So
to do this kind of operation
channel,
in the case of the fees
adding
rising.
Funds to this off-chain thing? Are you are you filling that tank up? If you're not filling that tank up and you have to go to chain in a high fee environment, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to be able to get your stuff in chain you need to. So it just moves some of this. So the trade-offs here are the capital efficiency of what's in the channel is greater, but suddenly you've got this new responsibility of managing an
on-chain balance in your Lightning node, right? I guess that's essentially the short version of what we're getting at here.
Right. So at some extent, if you think about it from a capital efficiency standpoint, you don't actually gain much capital efficiency by moving it to a different thing. Those are still funds that aren't being able, that's still Bitcoin that you own that's not able to route payments, right? And whether that true. Bitcoin that you own to route payments is scattered across all these channels or in one bucket, it's still capital that you're not able to deploy and be available for the opportunity of routing a payment,
gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's
but I guess you could probably say though that it means in today's environment, if you're kind of concerned that there might be a big fee spike, you might say, look, it's worthwhile. I'm okay with paying that, let's call it increased capital cost. I'm okay with that. I'll just have bigger channels, less channels, but bigger ones with a reserve, so that with anchor outputs, so that I can bump if I need to. Otherwise, I don't want to risk getting screwed in the high fee environment, right?
I think this is where I need to show the dual funding and splicing protocols that we've been working on for years, because the cool thing about dual funding and the cool thing about splicing is it really allows you to decrease the number of channels that you're operating and get you can open a channel with liquidity on both sides with dual funding. So instead of two people having to open a channel, cutting down the number of channels that you have is good for the network in a lot of ways. And this is this capital requirement thing is good. I think anchor outputs giving you as a channel operator, it gives you a finer grained opportunity to determine what your risk profile is in terms of capital that you're reserving for on-chain responsibilities or obligations, potential obligations, right? I think that's a good thing. I think that's cool because as an operator, it lets you determine sort of what your risk is. It gives you one more knob to mess with. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. But I think it does let you kind of make more interesting decisions about where you're putting your capital and what your risk is. And anyways.
Yeah. And speaking of where you put your capital, this reminds me of something I heard D++ say. D++, I heard you at the BTC++ in Austin recently, and you gave, as part of your intro, you were saying, it's a famous saying, I think Taj Dryja popularized this idea that Bitcoin is for enemies. But you're saying, hey, while Bitcoin is the money of enemies, Lightning is for friends. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Because I think maybe there's something there that in a high fee environment, it's more important to have good channel partners who are, let's say, online, reliable, and maybe you don't trust them with your life, but maybe you trust them a little bit so that they're not going to put you into a bad situation in a high fee environment.
Yeah, well, Nate can attest to the fact that when we started PlebNet, everyone on the main chain was just kind of fighting on Twitter. And we were having the best of time with each other with the magic of friendship. And we would sort of immortalize that friendship by opening Lightning channels to each other. So really, it was just kind of meant to be, a bit silly, a bit fun. That said, it is helpful to know who your channel partners are, because if you need to contact them for whatever reason, you can kind of go out of band on, say, Telegram. PlebNet is a fantastic place to do this, by the way, plebnet.io. And you can be like, hey, what's up? Is your node offline? And they might be like, oh, whoa, I need to get a new UPS, or, oh yeah, let me restart LND, or, ooh, maybe there was a bug in whatever beta version of the software I was using. It's probably time to upgrade. So it is helpful to have those out of band channels. If you open to bigger nodes, like Lightning service providers, it becomes, I think, maybe a little bit less necessary, because they have infrastructure that's probably a bit more robust than like just kind of the pleb nodes running for their laptop under their beds type thing. But yeah, I mean, perfect opportunity for me to shell PlebNet, because what PlebNet really is a peer-to-peer learning environment for folks who are interested in Lightning or running a node, who inevitably come up against some kind of roadblock that maybe prevents them from being able to do what they want to do. And because this is such a new technology, it's not always easy to Google questions and find answers, especially when you're looking at like Core Lightning, for example. A lot of us want to use Core Lightning, and we might have questions that, like I said, there's not like a Stack Overflow article, or there is, and it's out of date. And so you can just talk to someone who's been there, who's had that exact same problem, who can help you. And folks are very generous with their time. Plebnet.io.
Yeah, great. I'll put the link in the show notes. Nate, let's go to you. I know there was a post that I recently caught on the Voltage website. So I presume maybe you might have had a hand in that, or maybe you gave some suggestions there. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit in terms of, the Lightning node listener today, and it had some interesting practical tips. Maybe you want to just elaborate a little on those.
Yeah, so all right, so for those that are just running a Lightning node that are sort of a hobbyist or whatever, and just, you can't, at least right now, like, be 100% sure that you can avoid a lot of these issues, but you can do various mitigation strategies. I could go through a whole bunch, but like Dee was saying, choose your peers wisely. If it is not a big node that you can have access to, you can go to somewhere like amboss.space and see if they have contact info put there, which is really, really handy. I think a lot of folks are doing that now. And then there's, so I'm actually on that blog right now. Yeah, I helped write this one. It was a while ago though, but there's various settings you can do. So a channel can only handle, I think it's 483 sort of pending
HDLCs. Yep.
Yeah, HDLCs, but I was going to call
the
them
in-flight HDLCs.
Yeah, so what you can do is, because a lot of folks are streaming sats and stuff, and that can sometimes knock a channel out of whack, is you can limit that, and you can also set minimum or maximum HDLCs depending on how many, how your channel balance is. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell the network, hey, I don't want to route payments bigger than X, so don't try to, because I don't have the liquidity for it. Things like that help make the network more efficient and help keep your channels stable, especially if you're on Tor. This can be found in the LND configuration file if you're using LND. For Core Lightning, I'm not 100%. I assume there's something in there for that too. But yeah, so yeah, I'm skimming through that right now. Take advantage of anchor outputs, like we said. It's really important too. Not really, really important, but if you're spending a UTXO to open a channel, you should try to make sure there's a change output associated with that, so you can bump it. That's how the bumping works, is you need a change output to reallocate towards that, wrap that transaction up, and make a new one. And a good rule of thumb for that is if you're opening up a channel, we'll just say just at 1 sat per vbyte, and now the next block gets in at 80 sats per vbyte, you would probably want to rebroadcast that at like 160 sats per vbyte because the block weight is now double. So there's an effective fee rate for that. Those are just some ways that are practical on that. But I'm a big proponent of quality over quantity when choosing your peers. There's so many peers on the network now that you don't have to just throw a dart at a dartboard and hope that they're good. So there's various ways to sort of vet your peers. And I think in a high fee rate environment, if if we're at a point where the block subsidy is, under half a Bitcoin and the fees are like 3 or 4 Bitcoin per block or something, which would be pretty cool. You're going to have to choose your peers very wisely and have bigger channels. So to boil it all down, the best day to start a Lightning node was yesterday. The second best is now. I really think that, so I was basically just going to say, like, I feel like the future of Lightning I want to see, because a lot of folks are saying, okay, it's going to be custodial, it's going to be crazy. Yeah, all right, so folks are saying, or it's going to be like Wallet of Satoshi on steroids is the future, basically. And what I want to see is, I want to see more folks right now today start Lightning nodes slowly, learn slowly, have low time preference on it, and then slowly Uncle Jim for your friends and family. And even though it is quote unquote custodial, at least if you rug pull someone, they know where to find you to punch you in the throat or whatever. So like, that's where the future, so that's kind of what I'm pushing folks. Like, I really want folks to just start a Lightning node sooner rather than later to prepare for 500 sats per vbyte being the norm or higher.
So Nate, that's a really interesting point, that you can be the Uncle Jim for, your kids and your cousins, your sisters and brothers. Would you do like an LND hub thing, LN bits, situation for that? Yeah.
So right now there's a few ways to go around it. Right now for Core Lightning, Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong, but LN bits and LND hub is the best way to go for now, I believe. Which is basically just your node is the backend wallet or the backend infrastructure for various wallets that you could use something like Zeus with. So you can essentially, if your node has 50 million sats of capacity, you can create a wallet on it that says 0 on it, and folks can use your liquidity to send and receive. On LND right now, Lightning Node Connect is probably the best way to do that. And Lightning Node Connect uses a simplified way of giving permissions using 8 random English words to offer folks custodial wallets on your own Lightning infrastructure. So, which is really, really cool, because now you can just say, hey, you want a Lightning wallet? Download Zeus, scan this QR code that has 8 words on it, and now you have a custodial, however you know who I am, but wallet. So I really like the whole Uncle Jimming your friends and family. So
yeah, and look, I'm all for that. I think perhaps the challenge would come, and I could imagine a skeptic might say, well, hang on, guys, that's not really that scalable, is it? How many people are actually going to, manually go set this up and get people on? Now, maybe the argument would be, hey, it just needs to be easier software. Maybe it just needs to be a little bit easier, and, maybe over time it gets easier. I know maybe similar arguments would be made about stuff like Fedi as an example, because Fedi can have multiple federations. There is that argument there as well. So we'll see kind of what happens there. But of course, it's hard to predict the future, right? We don't know how much of a fad this recent round
of scaling. Yeah. The halvings are going to keep coming. There's no way to stop it. So we're in a race against the halvings to get this layer 2 infrastructure going. And, if Lightning isn't the one, then I hope the one comes soon, because we're going to need it in the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's talk now about Arc as an example. I did an episode with Barack just recently. I haven't released that yet. So that might be an interesting idea. But also, we don't know where the fee market is going to be, or the block space market, I should say, because it could be just a total fad, this whole inscription thing, and now it's kind of back down, and then we've got time for people to build things out, and maybe this is a great test run for people to see how things are working in the high fee environment. Because in a high fee environment, a lot of things might change, right? In a low fee environment, I'll make a quick point here, that in a low fee environment, you can very cheaply move things around between different wallets, right? You might be stacking on an exchange or earning somewhere into this other wallet, and you just kind of keep it as a little hot wallet because whatever, fees are low. And when I need to, I'll put some into a Lightning wallet, or when I need to, but in a high fee environment, it really forces all of us to actually start being efficient, because now it's like each time, if it's $50 a transaction or $20 a transaction, now we're thinking about it a little bit more instead of, it's just 50 cents or whatever, right?
In a Lightning context, that's really important from a strategy standpoint, because when you decide that you want to do something in Lightning, figuring out how many on-chain transactions that's going to take is actually really, really important. So that's why seeing Dusty's talk at the open source stage in Miami this year, blew my mind in a lot of ways, and actually inspired me to start a core Lightning node so I can learn more about plugins and stuff. Because it's, instead of having to close, open a new channel or do multiple things at the same time, you can use one transaction to move liquidity from 3 of your channels into another channel, and that sort of thing, which, as you were saying, is an efficiency thing, which we need to see more of.
So I've got a question for the group with regard to moving liquidity around. What is the thought on the topic of channel factories? Because my understanding with channel factories is you wouldn't even have to do any on-chain transactions to move liquidity around, since everything is sort of a virtual channel.
Probably beyond my level to answer that one. So I'm not sure if maybe Lisa or Nate, if you know.
I mean, I'm a little bit versed in zero confirmation channels, which is something that Voltage is going to be deploying as part of our Flow 2.0 liquidity service provision service, which we're really excited about, which I can go more into. But I'm not really know much about the virtual channels concept. Maybe Lisa does.
It's not something I'm an expert on. I feel like the channel factory stuff is definitely in the realm of still kind of doing some research in terms of how to make that work for people. I think one of the things that a lot of the proposals I've seen more on multi-party channel, which is how do you make one channel more efficient in terms of having multiple people on it. I think some of the challenges there tend to get into what I would say almost consensus level problems around how does a group of people determine agree on what the state of the funds in a channel are, and how many people have to sign off on that. And you start ending up, I think, kind of back in interesting, this is one of the problems the blockchain solves, is what is the current state. So I feel as soon as you start getting into, and I could be wrong about how the channel factory constructions work, which is fine, but anytime you start having more people, trying to agree on state in a decentralized manner, you kind of start ending up back at blockchains fix this. So I think things you start ending up with things that look more like federations. So there's kind of this a channel is sort of the smallest, a current Lightning channel is currently the smallest federation you can get. And everyone who's in a channel is a party to that federation. So you have some of first class, you kind of get into these citizenship tiers. I feel you guys were talking earlier about Uncle Jim, Uncle Bobbing. Well, that's you're no longer part of the federation of the layer 2 if you've got an Uncle Jim or Uncle Bob who's running your Lightning node. They're now the first class citizen in terms of the federation, which is a Lightning channel, and you are now just a client of theirs. Start moving into more federated things like Liquid or the proposed, Fediments that are in the process of rolling out. Most people on those are going to be I hate to say second class, I'm going to get in trouble for this, whatever, second class citizens on those networks, because they're not members of the federation, right? And the members of the federation are really the ones that get a lot of the trustless guarantees of that particular protocol. So anyways, channel factories, I feel I have questions about, what class you end up in on those is one question. And then the other is, what are the liveness requirements that you need from everyone? At what point is it we need a blockchain to solve this because it's a consensus problem? of agreeing on what the current state of all the virtual channels are.
Yeah, I had a chat with, I did an episode recently with Greg Instagibbs, he's working on some of this stuff around, LN symmetry and some of these ideas around multi-party channels, and I think he might be a good person to ask, but I know, definitely having more interactivity could make it even more difficult, and if people are already struggling in a two-party channel context today, but that said, it could also be that in the future people sort of are more professional about it, they know how to do it, and maybe you have these small channel, multi-party channel things. I guess it's too early to really comment authoritatively on it.
Well, I think part of why I bring up channel factories is just from my preliminary pass over ARC, it looks a lot like a channel factory to me, with some differences, and that I think ARC does settle on chain periodically, and that part I don't quite understand, and that part I don't really understand how it takes some of the stress off of the blockchain, given that it's always broadcasting to the blockchain.
So I think the answer in that case, in terms of the ARC question, the ASP instead of the LSP, it has a very high capital requirement. The ASP has to have enough Bitcoin to basically fund all of the transactions that are going on inside that, and every 5 seconds it's like a coin join round, and it's not necessarily hitting the chain every 5 seconds, but there's like this kind of rounds going on. It's kind of a complicated thing, kind of beyond my level as well, but I think that's kind of my understanding from talking with Barack, but I think it'll sort of come out.
So just to clear that up, since you had a talk with him, every 5 seconds, are you destroying the previous transaction? That's what I don't understand.
So I think the idea is that, you might be remixing, but you may not necessarily be remixing. So the ASP might have a bunch of people who are, working with that ASP, like customers or users of that ASP. The ASP is coordinating a round every 5 seconds, kind of like a coin join remixing round, but it's a virtual round. They're virtual TXOs. That's kind of this virtual concept that I think you're referring to. And there's a certain number of on-chain transactions required, but the ASP is basically doing that. But the point in that model is you can unilaterally still exit. I mean, just like in Lightning. So I think that's also an important point. I think another topic that would be interesting to chat about is swaps, because obviously I'm assuming, I think it's a safe assumption, all four people on here, on this call, or on this podcast, are Lightning users today. But not every one of our bills and things can be paid with Lightning. So there are times where we need to interact back with on-chain Bitcoin. And then this brings up that question of using swap providers. So as an example, bolts.exchange, and there are others out there, where they can give you, as an example, they can say, hey, pay this Lightning invoice and I'll pay out the on-chain amount for you, or the other way around. And also recently they brought in Liquid or LBTC as well. So I think that's an interesting idea. I'm curious if you guys have any reflections on the use of these swap providers, especially in a high fee context.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, what I'll say is the proper way to do a submarine swap is to go through Strike. And let's just be real.
Right, but that's these are custodial swaps, to be clear. So what we're talking about in this case is like the the more trust minimized way of
Which is why it's kind of a joke. And in Plebnet, we call this a ghetto submarine swap, where, to your point, it's not actually trustless, but man, is it convenient.
So it's important in my opinion, there's two major reasons why you would want to do this. Reason number one is you're bootstrapping a routing node and you need inbound liquidity fast because you just want to get it going quickly. And the other reason is your node is receiving a lot and you need a way to offload that outbound liquidity. I think that in a high fee environment, offloading that outbound liquidity in a way that, especially, if you're getting like a lot of income, right? And your channels should be reflective of the amount of income you're getting. But that aside, swaps are useful. We all know what Loop is and stuff. It's just, but swapping to a different side chain of Bitcoin is an interesting idea. It's not trustless. Liquid's definitely trust minimized, but it's not trustless. But you could peg in and peg out. So you can sort of offload your outbound liquidity, store it in liquid, and then wait until maybe fees go down or something to peg out of liquid, I guess is the idea for that.
Right, and so I think this was an interesting one because Bolt Stock Exchange just recently brought out that feature of having an LBTC swaps, and then now they've got Lightning Bitcoin, on-chain Bitcoin, and LBTC, which is, using the Federation. And so I think the point Adam, Back, and some others were making is that the minimum fees on Liquid are so low, and especially because right now there's not a lot of Liquid users, so it's like the Liquid fees are very cheap. So this might be an opportunity for people who are running bigger nodes who need to do these kinds of operations. Lisa, I know you were at Blockstream recently, so I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that at Blockstream we talked a lot internally about helping people do. There was a project that was being developed. I don't know what the status of it is. I think it's a little quiet these days. It's a peer swap project, which would help basically anyone swap with their peer using either Liquid or on-chain as a way to basically push funds. So why would you, I think there's a few things you can talk about with swaps. One is, why would you use them? I think splicing kind of brings up a new and interesting way to think about it. I think another thing about swaps is the thing I keep going back to and go back to constantly is capital efficiency. How much Bitcoin do you need to be available to make these operations happen? Where does that Bitcoin need to be located in order for it to be a useful thing? The availability of capital or Liquid and or Bitcoin in the right place is really, I think, going to be one of the things. So the fee rate market is the big one right now, but there's definitely a future where the fees that you're paying are going to be in relation to the availability of liquidity in the particular place that you're looking to do that swap, right? So basically what a swap requires is it requires 2x the capital to exist in different places for you to effectuate a change, right? So if I'm so what is a swap? A swap means I have a channel with Stephan. Stephan has on-chain Bitcoin, whether that's on-chain in Bitcoin itself or it's on-chain in Liquid, you still have to have that Bitcoin available equal to the amount of Bitcoin that I have in Lightning. And so that's what I mean by the 2x, right? Let's say I've got a Bitcoin in a channel. You have to have a Bitcoin either in Liquid or on-chain available for me to push that liquidity to you, and you to either through Lightning either through Liquid or through on-chain, send that Bitcoin to an address that I own, right? So swaps are expensive expensive, but the capital required to make that exchange happen is you both need a whole Bitcoin, right? So that's I think one thing when I think of swaps, I'm it's expensive. What's nice about that is that if you're a vendor and you're selling a lot of stuff on Lightning, you're going to get all of the money and all of the channels are going to end up on your side, right? So now you have a problem. You need more inbound liquidity on Lightning in order to receive more money, right? So you need to take this money in the channel that's yours. You're stacking sats, right? You're earning money. You're running your business. Maybe you're paying some of your expenses out with Lightning, but for the most part, maybe you're just stacking sats. Maybe you're running a really profitable business, which means you're earning a Bitcoin a day on Lightning or whatever, right? So you're stacking Bitcoin. You need to be able to take that Bitcoin and probably put it in cold storage or move it somewhere, right? A swap is a way that will let you do two things at once, which is cool. It'll let you stack that Bitcoin. Maybe you're stacking it on Liquid. Maybe you're stacking it in cold storage or something. It lets you both move those funds. You're taking someone else's funds. They're sending the cold storage for you. And in return, you're pushing all your liquidity to the other side of the channel, which now means you can reuse it to accept a whole bunch
start receiving again. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that swaps do that splicing does not do. Splicing, there's a way that you can marry splicing with liquidity adds, which will let you do a very, very similar operation. Almost, you can get rid of the swap stuff. You can have one on-chain transaction. So it's the same as a swap, which takes one on-chain transaction. You could use a splice plus a liquidity add or some mechanism of buying more capital from that node. So a swap means you can buy liquidity from anyone. Splicing, you would have to be buying liquidity from your channel peer for the most part. or they'd have to source it from somewhere. So then they would put more capital, you'd pay them to put more capital on their side of the channel. At the same time, you could then move the capital on your side of the channel to any on-chain address. But that would all be on-chain, and that wouldn't involve Liquid. And then you're stuck with whatever the current block space market rates are for doing that transaction. Versus if you're doing a swap on Liquid, then you're only paying the on-chain fees on Liquid or whatever. Okay, I've talked.
Yeah.
I've given
Yeah, I think I get you there. And so I guess just to make it simple for listeners, we can think of splicing like resizing the channel, whereas swaps, in this case where we're using bolts, someone's making a payment generally, right? Like you're making a right? We're kind of moving the balances around as opposed to resizing up or down. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the key point. And then it comes to also the fee rates, right? So I guess maybe today we're still lucky, right? That, right now today fees are still low. It's still, next block right now is 66 sats per VByte as I look right now. But in the future, it could go up a lot. And then what does that mean for Lightning fees? Does that mean in order to be a profitable Lightning routing node, you need to charge a lot more fees, either a lot more in your base fee or in your PPM variable fee, parts per million variable fee? Do you believe that, we're in the glory days right now and that fees are going to have to go up in terms of Lightning fees?
I personally think so. I think that if people running nodes don't do the math and make their fee rates appropriate based on the amount of capital they're spending, or could even spend, so you're not only just the amount that you're spending to open the channel, but the amount that you could spend, probability speaking in the future, then folks are just going to be losing money all the time, and that isn't going to be good. So, and nodes that are in demand that people are paying a lot, it'll cost more to route to them also probably. So, as much as I enjoy paying less than 1 sat to route a Lightning payment, there's a good chance that isn't going to be forever. However, it's still going to be a much better deal than on-chain is going to be, though, which is what's important. So to boil it down on that, if it costs you 2,000 sats to open up a channel, you should set your fee rate, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, you should set your fee rate appropriately to where if that channel drains, you get that 2,000 sats back at a minimum. Like, that's how I would do it personally. And it's important because the size of your channel, the bigger it is now, the less fee rate you have to put on it, because just a percentage base of it, right? It's, trying to get 2,000 sats back from 100,000 sat channel is probably going to be very difficult compared to 2,000 sats back on a 20 million sat channel. So these things, and it's kind of unfortunate because the people are going to be like, oh, so in the future, nobody's going to be able to run a Lightning node. It's going to be like insanely difficult. And the way it stands now, that actually might be the case. There's no denying it. So the future remains to be seen, but my fee rates will go up as it costs more to open channels and stuff.
Yeah, and so just to put that in simple terms, it's also that there may be listeners or people running Lightning nodes out there today who are not charging high enough fees, because the on-chain fees could rise to a level that they are now losing money on running that Lightning node. And, if you look at the average fee rate, so as an example, I'm just looking at mempool.space/Lightning, average fee rate today is 512 ppm. So 512 parts per million. And so, that's kind of the fee rate, or I guess the prevailing fee rate. And to be clear, that would be the fee rate per hop. So, if you're routing, through 5 people, you're paying that 5 times, right? So
and for those that don't know, 10,000 ppm is 1%. So you can do the math on that, 500 ppm.
Gotcha. So and so I guess it's interesting to see where that goes. Of course, it gets into that conversation around, people, I guess, are going to debate this for a while is around this question is of should Bitcoin be for everybody, or actually you just have to accept that,
but there's another way to offset that cost, and that is to provide liquidity towards those that are willing to pay you for it also. So things like liquidity ads and Amboss and Lightning Pool and stuff gives node runners a way to earn sats alternatively than just fee rates. So it is very like running a business, very much like running a business. You have to figure out, if you don't want to lose sats, you do have to do a little bit of calculation to figure out how you're going to play the game. A lot of folks actually still set 0 sats for their routing, and they just sell liquidity on Amboss all day. And that's perfectly reasonable.
Reminds me of zero fee routing.
Right, exactly. Rest in peace. But yeah, so I just wanted to point that out there that I believe liquidity markets will still be very important in the future, and those will be reputation based. So those that have been around for a while that have proven themselves will likely charge a premium compared to nodes that haven't reached that level, which is another incentive to start your Lightning node as soon as possible if you're capable of doing so.
I wanted to just point out maybe 2 things that I've worked on or have proposed that I think are kind of important in this area of how do we what are you controlling? Are fees going to go up for routing things? How do you decide what to set your fees at? I think is an interesting question then, right? I think that one of the big projects I worked on core Lightning last year was adding really detailed bookkeeping so that you can figure out where your costs are and how much you're spending money, where the money is being spent. Being able to have a detailed analysis of what what your historical costs have been, maybe figuring out a prediction of what your costs might be, and how to kind of price that into, doing a risk calculation, right, of how much do you think you're going to end up paying in on-chain fees, what's your risk of a forced closure, that sort of thing can help you price your liquidity, both that you're selling maybe through liquidity ads or on Magma, or how much you're charging for payments to go through. There's another thing that I proposed last year, went out on the mailing list, which is a new kind of way of allowing people to introduce price curves to the amount that they're charging for available liquidity in a channel as a way to dynamically but with the static information. So reducing the burden of communication on the network, but allowing people to set dynamic rates for their available liquidity such that when you have less liquidity, you get paid more for it, which means that if it's a popular route, you get paid more. And encouraging people to use routes that have more liquidity available. So this kind of and even maybe give people an opportunity to make payments at a discount. So setting negative fee rates for sending payments in what are called in directions that the capital is a contra flow, right? So if you're sending a payment in a direction that most people aren't using, that's beneficial for the router and for people using Lightning because it allows them to reuse capital without having to go on chain. So by introducing these new mechanics, the fee rate stuff for fee rate cards that allow you to do these kind of really cool price curves in a really data information efficient way. The current ways of doing it are very bad for the network because they generate a lot of gossip traffic. That'll really change the game, I think, in terms of giving node operators more knobs, more ways to kind of price their liquidity in intelligent ways that both enables them to reuse their capital more often, which cuts down on on-chain costs because you don't have to do rebalancing or moving capital around, as well as actually extracting more rent, so to speak, from high in-demand routes, which is kind of a cool thing.
So the idea on that is if I have, I found we'll just say that nobody else knows this, and I have a channel to appear, and I'm getting 1,000 ppm pretty well. I'm earning a bunch of fees. In a negative fee rate strategy, after that drains, I could set negative fee rate at 200 or 300 to sort of force it back in, and my net is still 700 ppm because then I'll flip it back around and then have it go the other way to keep the profit margin.
the idea is that like your channel will tend towards the middle. So like the balance will be sort of more even in the middle, such that payments have the opportunity to go both directions or whatever.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's like it's like a static state that's just kind of like if the channel's this big, or if it's a foot wide, it's like at the 6-inch mark, just kind of floundering around.
Yeah, exactly. And you introduce resistance or like decrease or increase the resistance in terms of what the fees are as it gets to the extremes of either being one way or the other, right? So this kind of introduces a new physics to payments, such that like it's going against the flow, you actually get rewarded, and going in the direction where flow is like more whatever, you get as a node operator, you get paid more, if that makes sense. So providing capital in like highly in routes where there's not a lot of availability, you get automatically.
But the trade-off is you need more bandwidth for the gossip. Is that?
No, it actually cuts down on the amount of gossip you need to do it. My proposal does. So currently people dynamically update their fee rates, which is very expensive in terms of gossip, because every time you update your fee rate, everyone on the node finds out about it. So more channels and more people running automatic fee rate adjusters is the worst possible thing you can do for gossip on the Lightning Network. Every new channel adds 3 new messages on the gossip, and then every time you update it, every time you update the fees on your channel, you send out a new piece of gossip for it. So if you have 4 channels between you and another peer, that's suddenly 12 gossip messages that everyone needs to know and keep track of. And every time that's 4 times that you update the fee rates, everyone's going to need to know about it. So it's this very bad, like almost exponential increase in the amount of data that's going out to do dynamic fee rates. Whereas the proposal that I came up with lets you kind of set it once and they dynamically change based on how the liquidity in the channel shifts, and you don't have to rebroadcast or send out any update. So it drastically reduces the amount of bandwidth gossip is taking up.
Cool. And in terms of Lightning services, there are some that, let's say, rely on low chain fees, and when chain fees rise, maybe those services, they get less volume, or they run into issues because they're just not profitable. I mean, I guess an easy example might be like Moon Wallet as an example, because there are a lot of Moon Wallet users, and basically almost every payment on that is an on-chain payment, and in a high-fee environment, it's pretty rough. Whereas like a Lightning native service, maybe they have a slightly better time in a high-fee environment. So that's one example. I'm curious if you guys can think of any others or have anything to add there.
I mean, Moon's the shining example of that. Moon's a very... I don't even fully understand how it works, but I do know that it does have that on-chain component, and it just, they eventually fixed what was happening there, but it really, I like when people and companies and developers get really creative. It's like, this is Lightning, but it's not actually Lightning sort of thing, but it's really user-friendly and kind of cool in like the appropriate environment. But I definitely want to see... as much Lightning native apps and services as possible. I'm a big fan of Phoenix. Phoenix still has a little bit of a headache when you're first getting going, but once you get going, it's great. So stuff like that I really like, but I can't really think of any other examples off the top of my head.
Yeah, but in fairness to the Moon guys as well, I mean, I know I think Dario put this on the mailing list. He said they've got 100,000 users, which is, that's impressive, right? Like it's, so for all the, complaints about that, I mean, they have a decent
I really
user
love
base.
the idea of having on-chain and Lightning sort of unified, because that's really nice user experience for people, So.
I think that comes back to the splicing concept as well. Like the way Dusty explains it as well is that, hey, in a world with splicing, you could have a more Lightning native experience. And maybe splicing would enable the Moon Wallet guys to do something even more incredible with what they're doing. Or maybe it would also help, the likes of Phoenix and Breeze and stuff as well. I guess one other area I'm curious to hear what you guys think in terms of the longer term future with Bitcoin and Lightning. It seems there's a lot more excitement and discussion around things like covenants, things like AnyPrev out or check template verify. Do you guys have any views on that? Do you guys think it would be necessary, nice to have, or a bad idea? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I think some of the use cases for covenants to harden your cold storage to me is a lot less interesting than all of the things that they can unlock for Lightning. So definitely looking at L2. Now, whether we get CTV or any pref out or both is certainly not something that I can really predict. But I think a lot of us felt kind of some pressure last year to sort of sign off on the correct covenant proposal, and we kind of reacted. But now that the pressure is off, a lot of folks are coming back around and saying, okay, like now that I feel free to make a decision on my own terms and my own time, these are pretty interesting. Like maybe we are going to think about doing this, not anytime soon, but I would say in the next few years. And I think I would be against a covenant proposal that didn't enable L2 personally.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, great. Lisa or Nate, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the covenant stuff is, I was like, it's interesting. I think people make interesting points about like, well, we already have covenants on Bitcoin, OpCSV, OpCLTV, or like technically covenant style stuff. Maybe we've already like opened that can of worms. Now it's just like, which strategy are we moving forward with? Yeah, I don't really have like, covenants aren't something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I definitely seem to spend more of my time thinking about liquidity problems on Lightning than across the network than the covenant stuff. But I think like, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. Where is that 21 million Bitcoin gonna end up? It's gonna be an interesting question in terms of which of these different layer 2s, whether it's something that uses covenants, or maybe it's like liquid, or maybe it's something else, like which of these like actual layer 2s, maybe it's like a federation like liquid, where is this, like which of these is actually usable, which actually has the liquidity and the capital available for people to do exchange, and is like adding covenants going to lock up more liquidity in like places that make it harder for other people to like use or do things with. The more kinds of layer 2s that we get, there's only 21 million Bitcoin to split between them. So,
yeah, there's an opportunity cost of where you put it.
Yeah, it's opportunity cost. And so I think like, the next like 5-10 years, I think that's going to become an increasingly interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I might as well just add here, Liquid, as I'm sure you're aware, Liquid already has some covenants. It already has, like, there's Signet and there's Inquisition and things like this that are designed to kind of test some of these out. And maybe the idea is that people test some of these ideas out there, and then it's proven out that there's some demand here, that there's actually something useful for Bitcoin here, and it's proven out that it's safe, as an example, and then maybe that's part of the pathway for some of these ideas.
Maybe we just leave it on Liquid, and if you want to do cool, interesting covenant stuff, you just go do it on a side chain, or if they build it into Fedimint, and so all the funky, fancy contracts can happen in the layer 2, and we leave Bitcoin as the store of value and don't really have to think too hard about what covenants mean for Bitcoin, because all of that experimentation happens on an L2.
Yeah. Nate, anything you want to add here?
I'm a big fan of privacy enhancing tools. So if there's a way to obfuscate ownership of UTXOs, whether it's by having multiple owners of a UTXO, or, I think that's really interesting and cool, and I would like to mess with it someday. And I think that the privacy challenges of Lightning should be tackled also, which is a whole other can of worms. I'm really a big fan of Paul and Tony building the Mutiny wallet. I think that is an incredible project that everyone should be keeping tabs on. But just the spec in general, Bold 11 has a lot of issues, and hopefully we can really tackle these. I know and respect the devs, especially the protocol devs, very, very, very much. So I know that it's very, very difficult, but I have low time preference, and I'm sure a lot of this will get solved in time. But we are in a race against the halvings, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. One other area I was keen to just ask on is HTLCs smaller than the dust limit. All right, so this is kind of an interesting idea, especially in the high fee context, right? Because as fees rise, there are people who are sometimes commenting and saying, oh, well, any amount in an HTLC below the dust limit is actually kind of custodial, or you're trusting in that context.
The best thing you could do to mitigate that dust thing is to just increase the minimum HTLC size. You're not going to, I mean, and it could be in the millisats too. But it's like, oh, what should I increase it? You look at your channel's activity and see what it's doing. If it's really blasting through a bunch of like streaming payments and you're not really earning a lot from them, maybe bump it up to 3 or 4 sets or something. It's my understanding that's really all you can do to mitigate that. I don't know if Dee has anything else on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've talked to node runners who have their minimum HTLC size as the dust limit. It's certainly one way of doing it. It's not my approach, but it's only going to get worse. As fees go up, this is only going to become more of a problem. So again, good for us to start thinking about this kind of thing in a timely manner. And Stephan, I'm so happy that you posed this topic. I just think it couldn't be more appropriate for today. And I think that even just a few months ago, nobody wanted to talk about what a Bitcoin world would look like in a high fee environment for whatever reason. We can't assume that fees are going to stay low forever. As far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin has sort of a binary outcome. Either it does its job of being gold 2.0, of being the money, or it doesn't. And if it does its job, the fees are going to be very, very, very high. I mean, we're talking hundreds of dollars per transaction, maybe thousands. And by that time, I don't know if we're going to be pricing everything in dollars. Dollars might not be our unit of account, but for all intents and purposes, I'm just using the unit of account that we commonly think of today. So, I mean, look, my node, I have 0 PPM, 0 base fee, no minimum HTLC. My node is for the plebs, by the plebs. It's basically just for educational purposes and my own personal use. And yeah, I am running this node at a loss because I'm paying for the infrastructure, I'm paying for
chain
all
fees,
the gear, and I'm paying for those channel opens and closes and forced closures and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that's the right way of doing it. I don't think that we have to rely on altruism in order to create the next financial rails for the entire global market. I'm just saying that that's what I'm doing right now. And I think it remains to be seen kind of how the incentives play out. But to Nate's point, we're not going to expect to see very low rates on Lightning forever. And I think we do a disservice to folks when we say that Lightning is free. And I am so guilty of this. I am so guilty of this because I want to destroy every shitcoin narrative and say, hey, Lightning is instant and Lightning is free. And again, this is a note to myself to better explain to folks that, okay, you are paying a percentage of the total. That percentage may change over time because I don't want anyone to come back to me in a few years and be like, D++ lied. And now, having to pay 0.5% and, she's a shitcoiner because she's like creating these false narratives just like everybody else. And so, yeah, for all intents and purposes, Lightning is like kind of free today. And enjoy it while that lasts.
I mean,
I think that's right. Go on, Nate.
I was just say, if you're buying something from a service that a ton of other people are sending money to, you can expect to pay a higher fee rate than if you were just sending some sats to your neighbor for mowing your lawn or whatever. If you buy something off of Bitrefill or the Bitcoin company, you can expect to pay a higher fee rate than just, like I said, paying your neighbor.
Yeah, interesting. And that's a fair point because that route is worth more, quote unquote, worth more, because more people are trying to travel that route, let's say. So interesting stuff. I think we'll probably have to wrap up here. I think we've been going for a while anyway, but I'll make sure to include everybody's links in the show notes. So D++, I'll put your social media handle there, and Plebnet. Nate, I'll put your social media stuff there, as well as the voltage.cloud, the blog post, and for Lisa, I'll of course put her links.
I want to also shout out Lorenzo, our technical writer on that, who has been writing some fantastic stuff on the Voltage blog. So definitely check it out.
Fantastic. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for joining me, and I'll chat with you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting.
So let me know what you think about Lightning in a high fee environment. How did you perform if you're running a Lightning node? And you can find the show notes at stephanlivera.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the Citadels.